You mean 11% of the population in 2010 was addicted to porn? It's higher than that now?
Yeah, so it's crazy, 75%.
Wow. They're chatting with who they think is this person on OnlyFans.
I really suspect it's the worst addiction on the planet right now.
Is there some common thing that people do that sabotages their well-being?
You're actually strengthening the anxiety's control over you.
People they're overworked, they're lonely, they're suffering from mental health issues.
We're also seeing the highest level of quarter-life crises we've ever seen.
Undiagnosed ADHD is causing depression for thousands of adults. Is that accurate?
It's really bad.
What are some of the easiest things that we can incorporate in our lives that give us a high return on happiness, energy, etc., relative to the effort that it takes?
I would say one of the most important things that has basically helped 99% of people I've worked with is
Sorry, I gotta get my energy going, man. It's one of those mornings where I'm just like, under caffeinated / over. I have like 1,000 unread emails because I just got back from a trip and I'm like fucking vibrating with, what it's not actual anxiety because it's not like there's anything actually going on. It's just, it's anxiety that feels real, but like is ridiculous because half of that email is like, I'd like to pitch this financial planner for your show. And it's like, delete, right? But it still feels real.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great point, right? So I think we restrict our definition of anxiety quite a bit. So we think that I'm not allowed to feel anxious unless I'm afraid of something. But what I'm hearing is that certain parts of your brain, like especially your frontal lobes, recognize that there is a lot of work that needs to be done and is starting to think through. So it's sort of like mentally loading responsibility.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is not exactly anxiety, but I think a lot of the circuits are the same, or the experience of it is the same.
It is, right? Because everybody has this feel. Everybody in the developed world has this feeling, right? It's like, they call it the Sunday scaries. Have you heard of this? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's like Sunday night comes around. For people who don't know what this is, Sunday night comes around, you're like, I got work on Monday. Oh, the Turner account, the boss is going to, we have that meeting. I've got to like make sure my PowerPoint slides are good. I got to do that at 8 a.m. And so you're preloading all the stuff that you have to do, and it's causing you anxiety because it's not time to do it yet. If you're doing it, you probably feel better, but you're just thinking. It's basically worry, but not, it's like it's like the other side of the worry coin.
Yeah, so I think there's two kinds of worry. There's worry that you're afraid that things will go bad. And then there is the anticipation of future effort. So you kind of know that you'll be okay, but your mind already knows that tomorrow is going to be a heavy lift for me. It's going to be challenging for me. There's going to be some amount of suffering that goes into it. So that's kind of like we're anticipating our future, or the subjective experience of difficulty as we solve our problems. And a lot of people think that I won't be anxious unless I'm worried about the outcome. No, you can absolutely be anxious about how much it's going to suck for you to have to deal with that.
Right, because I used to feel this way about working out, right? Like, oh man, I got my workout tomorrow. It's leg day. It's going to be really hard. Now I look forward to it, but it took like 3 years. But with email or other work, I don't know, I'm 44. I still don't go, I have so much opportunity to do email tomorrow. It's going to be great. Probably because the outcome is there's just more email later, whereas the outcome of fitness is I feel and look good, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you have a sense of what changed for you over the course of those 3 years? Why don't you dread it anymore?
Yeah, so I think part of it is, at first I thought, a trainer's going to like yell at you and demean you until you puke. So that went away after the first week because my trainer's actually really good, and that's not actually what good trainers do. They don't just yell at you and tell you you're a piece of crap and demean you and make you vomit in your living room. So that was the first change, and that kept me going for at least the first year or two. And then I think later, just the positive association that I had with having a good workout, reaching the edge of my ability, but never, having a heart attack as a result or something like that. And then looking in the mirror and going, I lost 40 pounds of fat and I gained 20 pounds of lean mass or whatever it is. That was pretty awesome. And that itself becomes addicting, probably because there's a visible and even measurable result. But with email, the visible result is 0 inbox for 13 seconds if you're lucky. And then everything floods back in. And then the result is, I don't know, I guess some stuff got done. It's hard to quantify. Certainly in there, some of those were important, but most of them weren't. And then it just starts over again. So maybe that's the difference.
Huge, right? So I think a lot of it is the way that we experience progress. And so I think one of the biggest challenges that I sometimes have, I try to help people with is like, how do you view progress? And a lot of times our society focuses on outcomes, right? So the value of studying for a test is getting an A. But that creates a very serious problem. Because if you work hard and you get a B, now your brain is making a calculation that says all of this effort wasn't worth it. And it actually decreases your motivation. Right? So if you fall short of your target, you'll actually decrease your motivation. So what you need to do in that moment is study harder. But instead, neurologically, what'll happen is your brain will be like, this wasn't worth it. We put in all of this effort and we did not achieve what we wanted. Instead, what we really need to do is calibrate towards feeling good about what we do, not what our outcomes are.
I see.
So, and I would even, and so with the working out, it's interesting because you mentioned, these other advantages, like you notice all these changes to your weight and stuff, but I would bet money that somewhere in there, you started focusing on being glad you worked out that day.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think there's ever a time, well, I should say, I do have, when I go through 150 emails or more, I feel like I feel accomplished, similar to having worked out that day. But somehow I don't look forward to the emails, but I do look forward to the working out. So what's going on there?
Yeah. So I think probably part of it is that there is that noticeable difference, right? So like the challenge is that with the emails, you can feel accomplished after 150. But there's no sense of like progress tomorrow because the emails are just back. So it's way harder to get progress. So oftentimes what we'll try to do is help people link the emails to something that is noticeable, right? So like if I go through these 150 emails, what has come out of that?
Yes.
And that's the value.
The realization that I need a virtual assistant. That's what's come out of that.
No, I mean, I think that's valuable too, because as we look at ourselves and we realize, okay, I just never get enjoyment of this, I think it's a good idea to pass it on.
Because emails are Sisyphus. Is it Sisyphus in the boulder? Is that the guy that's holding up the boulder?
Yeah.
And it keeps sliding down. But if and that guy's already jacked because he's a Greek god. But let's say that he wasn't. If he was like, man, my shoulders are starting to look really good after pushing this boulder up, maybe he wouldn't be so miserable. But that's what email is, right? It's the boulder, except you're never building anything as a result so far. Or at least that's not how I'm looking at it.
I mean, I think it's that latter part that makes a difference. So I literally, I was talking to someone a week ago who's an entrepreneur, and we were asking them a little bit about how they find clients. And, he was saying that he'll spend 40 to 50 hours a week for like 3 or 4 weeks of the year sending cold emails, just cold emails.
Oof.
And so it feels awful to do that, but he actually doesn't mind because that is worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars of business. Right? Which is why we get so much email, by the way, because someone on the other end is spamming us.
Like, Jordan, have you thought about making YouTube shorts? Yes, actually 50 times today, because that's how many times I've gotten this email. Yeah, it's true. And I see what you're saying. So if I were to be able, so he's got a pretty good direct link where he goes, look, I send 5,000 cold emails over these hundreds of hours, and 13 of them result in 6-figure clients through the year. It's really hard for most of us, myself included, to go answering. So, for example, fan mail is a big part of the mail that I get, which is, look, #blessed, right? It's good to have people telling you how awesome your show is or something like that in your email. When I was a lawyer, I didn't get a ton of that, as you might imagine. But also, it's hard to go, wow, I just answered 100 really nice people. That did something for my business, because it really kind of didn't. It did something for my ego only. But like that, the marginal difference between doing 10 of those and 100 of those is really tiny, right? Like I get one nice letter, it's really nice. I get 100, I have 100 emails.
Yeah, so I think that's also where you're thinking. So I think the purpose of answering fan emails, for you, the incremental difference is pretty small. But for the 11th person who gets a response, it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Right?
why I do
And the 12th person.
because they're excited. And it's nice to talk to these people. Like I enjoy it at some level. And so when I get the email back, I'm like, oh, this nice person with this funny story wrote me back. So I enjoy that. But yeah, it's still kind of running on the treadmill. It's still an extra, step on the treadmill. So I don't know, whatever. Now I just feel like I'm complaining about something the problem most people would kill to have, but maybe we should.
No, I mean, I think a lot of people resonate with the idea of an endless amount of crap coming into your email.
Yeah. It's just that I suppose most of my emails are nice, except for the YouTube Shorts pitches. I'm never going to make YouTube Shorts, and if I do, it's not going to be with you, person who's sending that email. So just don't bother. They're never going to listen because I'm on a list. I'm on many lists. You mentioned this. You touched on this a little bit earlier, and it's the sort of trauma. I'm exaggerating here. This email is not traumatic, but trauma is so fascinating. And I've heard you discuss the idea that if we have a traumatic experience, like a car crash, for example, our mind will play a trick on us and convince us that driving is scary and dangerous. I had a friend like that. She got in a car accident, and then we went driving in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains, and she was just frozen and like having a nervous breakdown in the back seat because there's no guardrails and like it's Morocco, so they're going 100 miles an hour down a blind curve. I kind of get it, but she was losing her mind. But even at home, she said, I've been driving for 30 years and now I can't drive anymore. So it's kind of like your mind is correct that driving is scary, but also you do it so often. Why is it scary again? Or food poisoning. Maybe that's a better example. You eat out thousands of times, hundreds of whatever times per year. Maybe your favorite fruit is sushi. You eat sushi a dozen times a month, maybe, but you get food poisoning once, you're never eating sushi again. Maybe it takes you years to recover. We don't really think, less than 1% of the time I eat this, I get food poisoning. So trauma kind of like hijacks this logical response and puts it into overdrive.
Yeah. So I don't even think it's, so I think the idea that the trauma convinces you, the idea that the trauma is incorrect is actually incorrect.
Okay. I see.
Right. So let's understand this. So like when you have a negative experience, our brain is wired for survival. So the first thing you have to understand is that the brain does not weight positive and negative experiences one-to-one.
Okay.
Our brain is designed to weigh negative experiences way more heavily than positive experiences. So if you kind of think about like, if you and I get into a fist fight and let's say you break a bone and I don't, that's a win in my column. But then if I get into another fist fight and I break a bone, that's not like even Steven. That's like if breaking a bone in the way that we evolved is like a lethal injury. Right? So food poisoning is lethal. Like not anymore, but in the way that we evolved, food poisoning was lethal potentially. So this is what we're biased against losing things. So we have this thing called loss aversion, right? Which is also, why if you ask someone, hey, if I give you a 50% chance to win $250 or a 100% chance to walk away with $100, which one will you pick?
I'm taking $100 every time.
You're taking the $100, right? So our brain is wired that way. And the reason for that is actually really interesting. So it's really fascinating. You were talking about the Sunday scaries or whatever. So our brain has a unique ability to feel future pain in the present.
Tell me about it. That's the story of my life. I think a lot of people listening
So if you think
relate.
about it, so this is what's really fascinating is that if you look at the Sunday scaries, what your brain is capable of doing. So you have a day, and my favorite example is the last day of a vacation.
Yeah, my favorite hobby is ruining that last day of the vacation.
Technically, you're on vacation. You get a whole day to enjoy yourself.
But I'm not doing that.
You're on vacation, but that's not what you're doing. You're thinking about going back. And the interesting thing is that we know that hypotheticals are capable of activating our amygdala, which is our fear center, right? So a hypothetical will make us feel fear in the present. It's not a hypothetical fear, right? It's like we feel the pain in the moment. So, and that's the way that our brain works, but we cannot feel a hypothetical pleasure in the moment. We can have some degree of anticipation.
Yeah.
You can be paranoid about a car crash, but you can't imagine going to the movies and then get a rush of dopamine. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to go to the movies.
Yeah, that's some bullshit, isn't it?
It's wild, right? So there's a fundamental imbalance in the brain.
Unfair.
So our nucleus accumbens, our positive emotions cannot be activated by hypotheticals, whereas our negative emotions can be. So that's like we get robbed. that way. So now this is what's really important about trauma is when we have a negative experience, our brain, for survival reasons, warns us against that experience, right? So now if I've had one car accident, we literally know that it creates something called hypervigilance. So you become hyper aware when you go into the car, because most of the time when we're in the car, we're not like paying attention to the car, right? Even when we're driving, like a lot of that stuff is done on autopilot. You're not like consciously thinking about everything all the time. And so what happens with people with trauma is that their brain kind of hyperactivates because it's had this negative thing. It's hypersensitive to potential problems, and we feel really, really, really bad. Now, the really interesting thing is that our treatment for that is usually something called exposure and response prevention. That can be pretty useful, where we expose ourselves to the thing and then we want to prevent the response. So our body will start to acclimatize to it. The really tricky thing that a lot of people trip up with is that even when you go driving, you may not be doing response prevention. You're actually like panicking and you're not really able to calm down. So it's almost like it's re-traumatizing, which is why it persists for so long. And every time you drive, you're not able to calm yourself down and have a more neutral experience. All it does is ramp you up, and then you feel paranoid. You start to use avoidance strategies, which is not actually response prevention.
Right.
That's the biggest mistake people make.
That's interesting. This reminds me, a long time ago, one of my friends, she was very unfortunately, she was assaulted while on a date, and she wouldn't date after that, obviously. But then she realized, okay, I'm miserable doing this because of this feature as opposed to a bug of the human mind where the trauma sort of made her think, like, every time I'm alone with somebody on a date or whatever, this could happen again. So I started to basically go to the same restaurants and sit where she could see me, but the guy couldn't. And we did that several times. And the strategy was, if she came up and said, "Oh my gosh, are you Jordan? I haven't seen you for so long. We grew up together." I would be like, "Oh my gosh, hi," and give her a big hug, and then we would just like leave. and then and that
lucky to have a friend like you, Jordan.
Well, I just had no life. But also I really, I didn't want her to keep seeing her suffer. That's the truth. But that never actually needed to happen. Basically, she just went out at a bunch of nice dates with nice guys and had nice dinners, and didn't feel scared because if the guy did anything, she was literally looking right at me, and he was going to get, choked probably if he tried to do anything. Plus, we're in a public place, so it was just a easier sort of thing. And then she was like, "Hey, I don't really need you to show up anymore." And I remember being like, we were both kind of really happy about that because it was like, hey, I can actually go to this Italian restaurant and not have a panic attack that I'm going to get attacked, and happily married. So. Yeah, but that was her sort of self-designed response, right? Or stimulus response, right? She kind of had to desensitize herself to this normal thing that most of us consider normal, that to her was an existential threat.
Absolutely, and I think that's what a lot of people discover, right? So the people who end up healing from it discover ways to expose themselves to the dangerous situation and then acclimatize to it so that it no longer triggers that response. Because remember that anything that we do that doesn't reward us, and that reward can be negative, right? So every time I play with a dog and I don't get bit, that will slowly extinguish the response. The biggest problem that a lot of people run into is that when they experience the response, they'll use an avoidance strategy. And then they think that I'm exposing myself, and so shouldn't that fix things? No, it's actually the opposite, because now what you're doing is when you feel that negative fear and anxiety and you engage in an avoidance strategy, you're actually strengthening the anxiety's control over you, right? So when the anxiety acts, you act in a different way. So that actually strengthens the anxiety. A lot of people think that by avoiding things, they don't really think about it that way. They're like, okay, I'm feeling anxious. Let me do something to make myself less anxious. And that will be an avoidance strategy, which will just re-trigger the anxiety when you're in that situation again. And then you'll become dependent on the avoidance strategy, which is why a lot of people who go to parties and feel socially anxious end up on their phones the whole time.
Yeah, well. Yeah.
I feel anxious. Let me pull out my phone. This makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then you're like, why am I even here? And no one's ever talking to you because you're on your phone the whole time. And it becomes like a vicious cycle.
Yeah. God, that's interesting. Let's take a second here because I want to put something on your radar that could actually change the way you feel day to day. You know that feeling when you're doing everything right? You're eating the salads, you're skipping the dessert, maybe you're dragging yourself to the gym 3 times a week, but you still feel a lack of energy, digestion's a little off, joints are achy, and your doctor's like, "Oh, let's just try another pill." It's like the whole system is set up to manage symptoms instead of actually fixing what's wrong. That's where Rivero comes in. I signed up to try Rivero. I've got to say, I'm impressed. What they do is they treat chronic disease at the root cause instead of papering over your symptoms with medication. A lot of the issues people deal with, so obesity, diabetes, autoimmune stuff like arthritis or Crohn's, some of it is, of course, not just random. Rivero dials in a high-protein diet personalized to you, backed by science, designed to restore gut health, reduce inflammation, get your metabolism working the way it's actually supposed to. You don't have to count calories. You don't have to do 2-a-days in the gym. You eat real food. You feel full. You actually start feeling good again, and you're not doing this alone. Rivero gives you a full medical team right in your pocket, so you have access to doctors, coaches, daily support, biomarker tracking. Your whole care plan lives in the Rivero app, so they're checking your labs, they're watching your progress, they're walking with you every step of the way. And most people who join Rivero, they start seeing results and reducing their medications within weeks. And right now, Rivero is giving you 10% off your first month. Just head to Rivero.com/Jordan to sign up. That's REVERO.com/Jordan. Honestly, if chronic illness is affecting you or somebody you love, this is worth checking out. It might just be the thing that finally moves the needle. There's a video in which you explain, for people who want to make changes similar to this, you say, a better question than am I ready to change is, do I wish I were somebody who wanted to change? Can you tell us, can you bring the difference into the foreground here? Because I've never heard this before. And also, it seems weird to ask, do I wish I were somebody who wanted to change? Because isn't the answer kind of always yes?
Yeah. So, okay. So great question, but we got to go back a couple of layers to understand this. Okay. So the first is that if you look at change, most human beings are conflicted about change, right? So I want to go to the gym and work out, but I also want to binge watch my favorite show. And so it's really interesting because what we really try to do is conquer ourselves, but you can't conquer yourself. Right? Who's doing the conquering and who's being conquered? So if I conquer my desire, I get really good at overcoming my desires. That's also strengthening my ability to overcome my desire to go to the gym.
I see.
So it's kind of weird, right? So it's okay, and so it's weird. It sort of doesn't work. Conquering yourself basically doesn't work. I mean, sometimes it works and sometimes people are pretty lucky with it and things like that. But a lot of people really struggle and they do want to change, but they also don't want to change.
Okay.
And then a lot of times what happens is it's not that we actually want to change. It's that we know we should change. Now, this is really important to understand because should in the brain does not lead to motivation. So generally speaking, if we look at the concept of should, where does it come from in the brain? It comes from our social emotional circuitry. So if we look at should, when I do things that I should do, what I avoid is a feeling of shame. What I avoid is a feeling of guilt. What I gain is a feeling of pride, potentially, right? When I do what I should do. So if you really look at it, the driver for shoulds is our relationship to other human beings. Which is why if there's something you should do in life and no one is watching, you'll never do it. Mm-hmm. Because literally should comes from, where does should come from? Should is a societal expectation, which even if you believe you should do things, where did you learn that you should do things? From other people. So should is fundamentally a social construct and involves the social circuits of the brain. Which is why when someone's watching us, oh, where do you want to eat? Now I'm going to order a salad when I go out with my friends. Yeah. But when I'm going by myself, it's going to be fried chicken and French fries, right?
So
should is never going to work.
I feel seen. Yes, yeah.
Yes. Unfortunately, right? Yes. If only we could be seen actually all the time.
But yeah, exactly. Man, I'm glad I'm not alone.
Now we have to understand want. So want comes from the nucleus accumbens. Want comes from want or desire comes from craving and behavioral reinforcement and the seeking of pleasure. So these two things are fighting. And if you are fighting in shoulds versus wants, the only way the shoulds will win is if someone is watching, which is why as people have become more isolated, their lives have gotten worse because so few people are watching now that we get away with it, right? We used to not get away with it because someone was paying attention.
Yeah, this is one reason why working out with my trainer knows a lot about exercise, and that's the main reason. But the other reason is it's really easy to lollygag when you're working out by yourself, right? You just don't. You half-ass it and then you leave when you're bored.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that's the first thing to understand. So wants and shoulds are like fundamentally different. They don't, and they can compete, but we need social environment to make them really work. So then the second question is like, okay, if you don't really want to do it, you should do it, but you don't want to do it. That doesn't activate our behavior in the right way because there's a should moving in one direction, there's a want moving in the other direction. So if we want to motivate behavior, right, motivation comes from the nucleus accumbens. We have to have a motivation to do something. But oftentimes it's really interesting. So if you move one level back, do you wish you were someone else? Now that's something you're motivated towards. And this is something that we've learned like in psychiatry is that, you know, if you can't solve this problem, oftentimes moving one level back is like where the money is. So now if I ask you, okay, so you don't want to work out, you don't really want to work out, fair enough. Do you wish you were someone who wanted to work out? And that's like, absolutely yes, right? I wish I was like these other people that enjoyed working out. I wish I was a different person. Now that opens the door to all kinds of things. It opens the door to self-judgment, which is like good in a way, right? Because now we're exploring this stuff. And that's the stuff that gets in the way of you actually engaging, like all these negative emotions. And the other cool thing is that then we can ask the question, okay, if you want to be a different person, how do we go about that? How do you actually change? And then something cool happens once you run down that sequence of exploration. You figure out, okay, this is how I become a different person. Then you become a different person, and then working out becomes easy.
I love this. I mean, it's scary to admit that you want to be a different person, I think, because it feels
but I mean,
shameful.
Just about everyone does. So why lie about it?
Well, because there's a shame element maybe involved, or like you can be a different person, which is actually empowering if you think about it. It's just that, wow, that's going to take a lot of work to become a different person. But for people who are hell bent on self-actualization and personal growth, you're already becoming a different person. I don't know. People say every 7 years, every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever it is. You're already become like I'm essentially in many ways a fundamentally different person than I was, let's say, before I started to value my health, not just work out, but value my health. I was in denial before that. I look at photos and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did that happen? I look at I say I made the mistake of, but really I luckily about 11 or 12 years ago now, I went to one of those executive health screenings. Have you ever done one of these? And it's like,
but I'm somewhat
you get like a DEXA scan, which is a bone density and fat scan, and they take your VO2 max and they weigh you and they show you. And I was like 40% body fat. And I was like pre-diabetic. I was 33 years old, pre-diabetic, and I was over, like, my lean mass is like 127 pounds, but I weighed like 192 or 193. I mean, it was ugly. And I was like, but I'm not that fat. And the doctor was like, you are going to get diabetes. You're going to get this. This is going to happen. You're probably going to die earlier. He's like, or you can do all of this totally different stuff that you have never done and change. And these markers will all change. And you're young. You can and should do this. I was on blood pressure medication. Dude, 33 is on blood pressure medication.
That's really young.
And they're like, you're never going to be able to stop taking these. And the guy who did the screening is like a really well-respected doctor. And he goes, look, I'm not your primary care physician. You should definitely not need those. There's no reason for you to need those. That's horrible. I'm horrified that you take these. Get a different doctor and also get yourself in shape. And so it took me a few more years of like farting around. I'm going to work out on my own. I'm going to eat a little bit less. And then when I finally started to actually value my health, I look back at that other person and I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, who is that idiot who's just like, I'm going to eat whatever I want, do whatever I want, not value like, what are you thinking? And, now I value other things in my life in a totally different way. And I think people can you can sort of change fundamentally who you are. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I think there's a lot of resistance to, well, you can't just become a different person. That's wishful thinking, or it's you play the hand that you're dealt. And I just don't necessarily always believe that you're sort of stuck where you are.
So it's kind of weird. I know I'm going to say a couple of weird things. It's a beautiful story, by the way. So I think you're right that a lot of people don't think you can change. And I think it's very possible to change. And I also think it's way easier than a lot of people think it is. So I know this is going to sound insane, but if you really think about it, the hardest work is to not be yourself, right? So we think we are this particular thing. Like we think that I'm like a piece of crap and I'm like fat and I'm overweight and all this kind of stuff. Like that's who we think we are, but that's not really who we are. I mean, it's our current existence, fine. But I think that oftentimes my experience is that changing is way easier, or not way easier, it happens way faster than people expect it to. And the reason that people think it's really hard to change is because no one has taught us how, right? We learn like algebra, but we don't learn the science of changing who you are. And once you understand that, then like things actually become pretty easy. So I'll give you like just a simple example. You said that sometimes people say, okay, do you want to work out? Yes or no? Do you wish you were a person who wanted to work out? That question is like 10% of the change.
Huh.
I know it sounds crazy, but like literally in that moment, you are learning to look at yourself in a different way. You are changing the questions that you ask yourself. And the reason that people don't change is because they ask the same question, I should work out, I should work out, I should work out, I should, and they bludgeon themselves with that and it never works. So like it's crazy like how asking the right question can elicit such a large change. And changing your relationship with yourself and asking yourself, who am I? Instead of forcing yourself into trying to be something, like that change in and of itself is gigantic. Like, who am I? What do I really want? And like, you don't really answer that question honestly. You don't say to yourself, I actually don't want to work. I don't want a career. Like I'm living my life ping-ponging, not towards what I want. I'm ping-ponging between two negative things. I feel ashamed for not having a career, right? So you're like, that's why I should have a career, but I really don't enjoy this job. I don't want a career. And so it's very hard to change if you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
Like that's 50% of it. So I think the flip side of it is also it becomes way easier to change than a lot of people realize once you stop lying to yourself.
That's fascinating. I love that. And I'm going to ruin it by switching gears into OnlyFans addiction, because this is such a juicy, funny, well, I shouldn't say funny. It can be tragic, but it's also just, it's such an odd 2024-ish phenomenon. I got a letter on Feedback Friday, which is our advice segment of the show, where a woman who does OnlyFans, she was our listener, she finds out that this person who's sending her and paying her to do some pretty like kinky, gross stuff. And I'm not kink shaming. She said this is like really denigrating and gross stuff that this guy was having her do. But she's like, well, he's paying me a lot of money. She finds out it's her friend's husband, who's a devout Jehovah's Witness. And he came out, well, she found out and said something and was like, it's like just ruined their marriage and everything. And he was clearly addicted to it, right? It wasn't good for him. This wasn't something he wanted to be doing. It just ruined his marriage. But what was more weird for her was this, his arousal seemed almost like it was the social element of the relationship. Despite all the weird stuff he was having her do, it was actually the fact that he was kind of like, had like an intimate connection with her in this way. And I know a lot of people are doing this. They're being intimately connected, or they're chatting with who they think is this person on OnlyFans. And it's this, again, very bizarrely 2024 kind of phenomenon.
Oh, yeah. So like, this is really important to understand. So the first thing is that, so I think pornography, we'll get to OnlyFans in a second, but I think pornography is probably, I know this is going to sound kind of weird, but I really suspect it's the worst addiction on the planet right now.
Really?
And I know that sounds like a really extreme take, because we have people dying of opiates and things like that. So if you look at the statistics, okay, back in about 2005 to 2010, the rate of pornography addiction was like somewhere around 3 to 11%. Can you guess what estimates of pornography addiction are now?
What, 3 to 11 sounds insanely high. So I was going to, no, because I thought 11%, you mean 11% of the population in 2010 was addicted to porn or at the high end? It's higher than that now, I assume? That's crazy.
Yeah, so it's crazy. 49 to 75%.
Wow.
Okay, like it's insane.
How do they measure
and these are surveys. It's great question. So I think like one of the citations I'm talking about, I think surveyed 13,000 people, random people, and just ask them, do you feel like you're addicted to pornography?
Holy smokes.
And 49 to 75%. Some studies suggest it's around 66%. Let's assume that all those studies are wrong.
Right.
Okay. Let's assume that they grossly overestimate it. Let's assume that they're like double it. Even then, we're talking about 30% or something like that.
Crazy.
It's insane.
Crazy high.
So the numbers are literally unbelievable, and I wonder if I'm just like misinterpreting the research or things like that. But it's like, it's crazy.
That is very alarming. In fact, there was so much talk of porn addiction that I was basically like, I'm just never going to watch porn again, and I had absolutely no problem with that. It was actually really easy because it's really, most of it is dumb. I don't know if you've ever seen it, Dr. Kanojia. It's actually mostly garbage and silly and ridiculous. So it's really, I found it as a 44-year-old man pretty easy to just be like, I'm never going to, use this again. The fact that there are maybe 70% or whatever that number was of people who say that they probably can't stop or that they would have trouble stopping is alarming. Isn't even the word. It's beyond alarming. You can't overstate
it's wild.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like people don't, and I was trying to figure out like why, like what's changed? And then I tried to understand, okay, what is the neuroscience of pornography? So I tried to I did a deep dive. There's a beautiful paper that I found that talks about sexuality in the brain. So where does sex exist in the brain? And so it turns out that we don't have a circuit for sex in the brain. Sex affects every aspect of the brain. So it involves so many different regions, involves a ton of different neurotransmitters. And if you kind of think about it, like what is the purpose of human evolution? It is to procreate, right? So our whole brain, our whole physiology is going to be wired towards this one goal. And so now what you have is pornography, which hijacks all of these circuits. And what we're seeing about the addictiveness of pornography is that the more that pornography approximates real sexual behavior, the more parts of your brain that it's going to activate. And OnlyFans...
I was going to say that I see where you're going with this. The social element of like being able to say good morning to your favorite whatever OnlyFans person, that is the circuit of like, hey, I'm connected to this person. We have a real intimate look, we're talking about our day. She's asking how I am. That doesn't happen in my real life because I sit around coding all day or playing games. And then it's like ... almost an afterthought after 11 p.m. You're watching some videos of her, I don't know, getting railed by her boyfriend or whatever the hell you're paying for. But like it hits all these different switches as if they're a real person that's really in your life that really cares about you. And that's more than just watching a video.
Yeah, right. So I think that's the biggest change is that pornography used to be passive consumption. There's no interaction. And if you think about how does your brain know you're in a relationship? Like, I know it sounds so weird, but a lot of times it's like what you said. People respond to you. People say good morning. People interact with you. So now what OnlyFans has created is the capacity to form a relationship. And it's such an interesting relationship. People think it's a very, very unhealthy relationship. And in some ways it is, but in some ways it's the best relationship. Because in this relationship, as long as you pay money, this person does what you want.
Jeez.
And if you look at like what do people want in relationships?
Healthy, doctor. As long as you pay money, this person does what you want.
But what do you want in a relationship? You want someone who does what you want them to do.
Oh my gosh. Man, that's it. That's right? A dirty secret though, right? Like, well, okay.
And all you got to do is pay for it.
Yikes. Maybe I should start an OnlyFans. I already have a parasocial relationship going with many of my show fans. No videos, though. No videos. That might be a deal breaker for a few of these folks. Wow. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of people that really...
It could be a deal maker for a lot of them,
what? Too, I will never show you anything below the belt. How's that? All right, here's my money. It's really... It's scary that this is
so I'm going to make it a little bit scarier. So you say, Jordan says, I'm never going to show you anything below the belt. Fair enough, right? So imagine if I'm one of your fans, how intoxicating it is for me to get you to change that. The feeling of power over another human being, right? So sure, it's like false in a sense, but it kind of isn't.
Right. Like, I'm never going to show you anything below the belt unless you give me like 10 grand, in which case, there's going to be, there might be a dick pic coming your way.
It's going to be more addictive if you don't even add the unless.
Right,
I want you to have a And I like, I've worked with these people, right? And like, when we really like, when you like get behind closed doors and you like talk to them about how they really feel about it, right? There's an immense sense of like power and influence.
This is
and connection.
The person who's addicted to OnlyFans, right? You're talking about.
Yeah.
I see.
Oh yeah.
I see.
And the flip side too, but
that's a different
right?
podcast.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I had not thought about that. You know, if you and I ever collaborate on this, we can split it 50-50 because it seems like you got the winning formula. This is so damn fascinating, but I'm more concerned or interested in, I think, what do people do if they find themselves in this trap? I mean, is it as simple as, because when it's an addiction, right, you don't just say, hey, you know what you should do? Stop chatting with the person who's actually just an Indonesian chatbot agent, not the girl in the video. Dude, you have to stop being intimate with this person because it's a trick. It's an illusion, right?
Well, we tend to think so, right? But like, this is where, like, when I feel a connection with a chatbot in Indonesia, I don't want to believe it's a chatbot in Indonesia. I want to believe it's a real person. And they're like, when you see a name in a text message, like, you could be an AI generated image. I could be an AI like, this could all be false, but that's not what we believe. It's not what we want to believe. Our senses are telling us this is a real conversation. And when you get, you know, like, if you kind of think about it, like, we have a vested interest in believing this is real, even if we know there's a possibility it isn't. And then we're getting enough literally sensory input to make it feel real, right? So let's just start by tossing that out, or like acknowledging that. Now, in terms of how to stop, doesn't work to just stop. So for some people, cold turkey can be effective, you know, especially if someone finds out about it and then they're like regulating you. But in my experience, you know, I've been a doctor for 10 years now, and a psychiatrist for 6. And like, what I sort of have learned is that the first thing to overcome an addiction is you have to want to overcome it, right? So the willingness so people are like, how do I stop? And then, you know, this is where we go back to the first question, right? Which is like, do you really want to stop? Tell me why. Help me understand. Why is it important for you to stop? And then we have to ask another question, which is, what would you give up by stopping? And this is the question that a lot of people don't ask. And this is the really important question, because what's driving the behavior is that question. What do you gain? Addictions are not problems. They're solutions. This is why we keep doing them.
Won't you go into some sort of withdrawal from this as well? Like, you'll feel super lonely, right?
Yeah, sort of, right? So, and that's what tends to happen is people don't realize. So there are like 5 discrete circuits in the brain that when I'm working with someone with pornography or OnlyFans addiction, you have to target all these. So the problem with porn and OnlyFans is that it has such a global effect on the brain that you can't just stop. Because even if you address, let's say, the dopaminergic aspect, you're not going to address the loneliness aspect.
Right.
So people will resist the dopamine and they'll succeed, but then their loneliness will start to kick in. So usually what my strategy is to really focus on 5 different things and to address those 5 things simultaneously. You have to start with the thalamus, which is your sensory input. So recognize that your desire is controlled by your sensory input. So log out of all of the websites, disconnect your bank accounts, make it harder for you to access the stuff, uninstall all the apps. Right. That's not going to be enough.
This is like the James Clear Atomic Habits method, right? Like, make it such a pain in the ass to get back into it that you have enough time and runway to stop yourself.
Absolutely, right? So there's an impulsiveness component too. So that's the second part of the brain, our frontal lobes, which are our impulse control, our willpower. So those need to be trained up. So this is where practices like meditation or other kinds of like planning activities, using calendars, things like that, filling up your day so that we're not vulnerable to impulses.
I was gonna say, you put your masturbation time on your calendar. That's awkward.
Yes.
You do.
Yes.
You do.
So in the most severe cases, we'll give people 1 hour in the morning, like usually around noon, and like 1 hour in the evening.
Wow. An hour. I mean, bravo for somebody who needs an hour each time.
No, I mean, so I think a lot of people don't understand that pornography addiction is not about masturbation. So a lot of times pornography addiction involves second screen porn use. So people will just have porn on their second screen while they're doing like pivot tables on Excel for like hours at a time. Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand this.
That had not occurred to us, dude.
So that's where we get the third part of the brain, which is our limbic system and our amygdala. So if you kind of think about it, especially if you're a dude. And this is probably one of the reasons why men are more vulnerable to pornography addiction. So you can be having a panic attack, but if you have the chance to procreate, like, there's this joke that men only want one thing, the drive for sex is very powerful. It's suppressing everything else in our brain. So when you watch pornography, it literally shuts off your negative emotional circuitry. We reduce the blood flow to our amygdala and our broader limbic system. So people will use it as a very strong emotional regulation technique. It's very potent at that. So that's thalamus, frontal lobe, and limbic system. And then the fourth system that we have to target is the oxytocin system. So this is like oxytocin is our emotional bonding hormone. So remember that, like, I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but in the way that we evolved, you couldn't have sex without some kind of relationship, right?
Yeah.
So you couldn't, like we lived in tribes of like 300 people. So you had to develop some kind of social activity in order to have sex. And if you look at teenagers, this is why like friendships become so important for teenagers, because we have all these parts of our brain that are driving us to connect with other human beings as an avenue to sex. So there's a part of our brain that believes that any kind of sexual release sort of checks the box of forming a connection. It doesn't really, which is why we never feel connected, but our brain is tricked. It's wired to think that these two things are connected.
I see.
So as long as you're feeling lonely, you'll return to pornography. And then there's the dopaminergic system, which is, so I think generally speaking, when we're disconnecting from OnlyFans, what we tend to find is that you have to build a lot of positives in your life and then kind of disconnect.
I'm still hung up on this porn addiction. The second screen thing is just trippy, man. With porn addiction, is there, and I can't believe I'm asking this, but whatever, is there a connection between events happening in people's life on any particular day and when they bust open the porn? Like, is it stress related?
100%. 100%. So there are a couple things like a lot of people don't understand about porn addiction. One is that one of the biggest risk factors for porn addiction is pre-pubertal exposure to pornography.
Oh, gosh.
So everyone thinks that porn addiction is about like sex and getting laid and being horny. Most of the time, it actually isn't. So, I've worked with several people who have healthy like marital relationships. They'll have healthy sexual relationships and they'll be addicted to porn. So and something changes in your brain when you get exposed to it. It's kind of like getting, marijuana at the age of 9, by the way. And 9 is the average first stage of pornography addiction.
That is
exposure.
Gross and horrifying.
And so people get exposed to it and something changes in your brain. Like something like you don't feel horny. You have no concept of lust, but these like limbic structures feel soothed. You get some amount of like dopamine release and you kind of get like hooked to it, even though it doesn't do anything for you from a horniness perspective. And then you hit puberty and then things get worse.
Right. Oh my God.
But so there's, so first thing is that like people get exposed super early. And then what happens, you mentioned, what are the events that trigger it? So this is also another part that we work on a lot, is to really pay attention to your triggers. When do you watch it? Right? So what people will, it's almost like an IV for dopamine and an IV for emotional regulation. And so what we'll do is talk about anticipation of certain difficult parts of the day. Like you have a performance review coming up. This is going on. What are the urges you're going to feel? How are you going to protect yourself from it? And we want to basically plan a contingency or an exit strategy. And then what we end up doing is like, so for, if you're going to watch porn at 1 o'clock, we're going to hold off until then, and we have to really plan for it in order to even succeed there.
So you have these guys plan like your porn time where you're going to scratch that itch. Mm-hmm. That way it's not just the whole day on a low simmer. That's wow.
Yep.
I really have sympathy for people who are stuck in this. I can't imagine what it takes to get to the level where you buy a second monitor just to have some gross stuff playing while you're using Google spreadsheets or whatever. It's so weird. And I don't mean to denigrate people by saying it's weird. It's alien to me, and I think a lot of people don't understand what sort of situation these people find themselves in. And again, I actually have deep sympathy for them because there's no way that that's fun, interesting, entertaining. The shame attached to it must be crazy. I just feel those people must be desperate by the time they're reaching out to you to fix it.
Yeah. So I think that's what's confusing is they themselves actually think the way that you do. It's really confusing to them because we have all of we basically have a shared conception about what porn is about, right? And why we use it and what it does for us. They themselves are the most perplexed by like how hard it is to kick. And they're like, I don't even understand what this is doing for me, but like it's doing something for me.
Yeah, it's because it's not, they're thinking, I'm not here to do a certain thing, right? I'm literally handling a PowerPoint presentation for my boss. Why am I playing this on the other monitor that I bought for the purpose of having this so that I can see it 24/7 while I'm working? It's so bizarre. Man, if you're struggling with this, reach out for help. There's help out there. Do not let this dictate the rest of your life.
And I think you hinted at a couple of other things that are really important. One is that it is very shaming, right? Because people don't understand. You judge yourself harshly. Yeah. So once you activate the shame circuitry, the best way for you to deal with that is to watch pornography. So that creates this cycle of shame and worsening addiction. The second thing that it also does is it's very isolating and lonely because people don't understand and you get judged for it, right? And you said this person who is doing the OnlyFans addiction, how's their marriage working out, right? Does anyone stop and ask, hey, this person needs help? That's almost never what we say, right? We're like, this is gross. This is disgusting. I mean, the dude is a Jehovah's Witness, apparently. Yeah. So presumably is like tries really hard to be a moral and good person. And like, do we give them any credit for that? Of course not.
No, it ruined the marriage because apparently any sort of porn consumption is basically cheating, which is, one of the major things. So even if he wasn't paying for it, but was just looking at the stuff, it would be bad enough. But the fact that he was paying and it was like really kinky and it was his wife's friend, that just was too much.
Yeah. And so that sort of activates or sort of isolates us, right? And then our oxytocin system wants us to bond and reconnect. And porn gives us some like shadow of that. It satisfies that part of us for a few moments.
Oh, man. So shifting gears a little bit here, why do you think mental illness is on the rise? Are we just better at diagnosing it? I'm always wondering about that. When I see stats like autism is up 5,000%, it's like, okay, well, now we can see it instead of just thinking that this person is weird or has, a learning disability.
So that is a piece of it. So the rise in mental health diagnosis does definitely include catching things that we used to miss. But I think it's also on the rise because there are many influences in our life that make us more mentally ill. So just to give you like a really simple example about autism spectrum. So the likelihood of autism is tied to the age of the parents. And it's one of the very few diagnoses that is tied to paternal age as well.
Interesting.
So one of the other reasons why autism is increasing is because the older you are when you have kids, the higher your risk is of developing autism. I think those statistics are still correct. Last time I checked them, they're like, that's one of the risk factors is paternal age. So that's one reason why autism is increasing. But I think what we're also seeing is a whole-scale effect of technology on the brain, which is worsening mental illness. So we're seeing things like pornography, right? So pornography is getting more addictive. So you said that I watched porn, I just didn't get into it. That's because you're lucky enough that the algorithm did not find what worked for you, right? If you keep scrolling, the algorithms are now really, really good at figuring out what kind of porn will work for you. And so we're seeing like more pornography exposure. We're seeing social media usage, video game usage. There's a lot of fundamental changes in our brain that are happening because of technology and the society that we live in. So the other basic thing that's happening is like we no longer have to fight for survival. And since we don't have to fight for survival, our mind gets occupied on other things. And those things are actually harder to fulfill.
I see.
Like purpose. And not one of the two biggest variables, risk factors for pornography addiction is a sense of meaninglessness in life.
I was just going to ask if it's a profound and widespread lack of purpose, because it seems like what you're saying is we've maybe, air quotes, solved the lower rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so now we're kind of turning inwards at the top of the pyramid, which is, I think, self-actualization. And it's like you find yourself lacking ... pornography. It's funny you mentioned the algorithm didn't find what works for me. If there was porn where somebody was like, your podcast is so interesting, then maybe I'd be hooked on the thing. But instead it's just, it is what it is. I'm not going to, this is a family show. It's family-ish show. But yeah, man, people they're overworked, they're lonely, they're suffering from mental health issues at seemingly the maximum rate we've ever seen, is there some common thing that people do that sabotages their well-being?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple. So I think if we look at all of the technologies, there are a couple of things that they tend to do, all of them. The first is that they give us a messed up sense of self. So if you look at like, one of the foundations of health, and this is why we, asking the question, do you want to be someone who wanted to work out, right? So we have to connect to ourselves. If we're not connected to ourselves, I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but we're like operating, how can I say this? It's like we're operating off of a false version of ourselves, right? So if I build a life based on who I think I am and what should make me happy, I'm not going to end up happy. So we're also seeing the highest level of quarter life crises we've ever seen. And I think it's something like 25 to 50%. LinkedIn did a study or something where 50% of people, up to 50% of people, have a quarter life crisis, which used to not really happen much. So the biggest thing is that all of these technologies distort our relationship with ourselves. So we have these weird things where when I post something on Twitter, let's say, and it gets like this many likes, the social circuitry in my brain feels somewhat validated. But then it also feels invalidated when the next post doesn't get as many likes or my friend gets more likes. So there's weird things going on where like our brain is designed to have communities of 300 people. That's what we have evolved in. Now that we have like thousands and thousands of people, it really distorts our sense of self. And this gets really, and the way that it does this is platform specific. So we're seeing a rise in eating disorders and body dysmorphia in both men and women. So as a simple example, when I use a filter, right? So I even noticed that some apps will auto-apply filters. You don't even have to apply it.
Oh.
It does it automatically.
Like, we noticed that you're kind of ugly, so we've taken the liberty of removing every blemish from your skin and making you look younger.
Yep, right? So it's not even that you're kind of ugly. You can be beautiful and they'll do it too. We're going to just do it to everyone. And now the human brain is faced with a really weird conundrum. I like this person on the screen. I don't like this person in the mirror. So what does it...
Yeah, I was just going to say that's not something that the app tells you, right? It's just you don't... Your message that you're getting is the app thinks I should look different, and wow, it's right.
No, not even that you should look different. I would say that the app makes me a different person.
I see. That's even worse.
Right? So it's like, it's so fundamental, but when you wake up in the mirror, or when you wake up every day and you look at the mirror, and you have this artificial version of yourself that is better than what you actually see, what impact does that have on your psychology? It is not good.
No, that's terrible.
It's awful. Right? So this is where we see body dysmorphia, we see eating disorders, we see rises in depression, we also see rises in social anxiety, and everyone is looking at the blemishes on my skin because I myself am not used to seeing them.
Oh, right.
Now it's like, okay, I'm going to send myself I'm going to take pictures and send them to my friends because I'm using Snapchat or whatever, or for dating profiles, but I'm walking into the date knowing that the person that I am is not as beautiful as the person that they're attracted to.
Brutal. Right. So you're going in with that handicap, right? Like, all right, I'm already down one because I'm not the person in the pictures and they're not the person in the pictures, but I'm not thinking about that. I'm not thinking we're starting on even keel because we're both down one. I'm just thinking about how crappy I look compared to this fake AI version of myself on the internet.
And that's just one slice of identity. Then there's all of the other, okay, what kind of stuff pops up on my feed? The kind of stuff that pops up on my feed is the stuff that I am interested in, produced by people who are better than me. Right? So it's like, if I'm interested in entrepreneurship, I'm going to go on the Jordan Harbinger podcast and I'm going to listen to some amazing entrepreneur who has done way more than I've ever done. And those are our exposures,
right,
day after day after day after day after day. And I'm not saying that your podcast is bad. I think it's great.
No.
Right? But like, we have to understand that these are tools that can help us in a lot of ways and hurt us in a lot of ways.
I'll be honest, Feedback Friday, where people write in with these really serious problems, one of the main things people like about it when we did a survey and what we see on our subreddit is people go, wow, other people have really serious problems. My life isn't so bad. And I'm rooting for them to be better because we're all we're all humans. We're all helping it. Like Jordan and Gabriel are helping them and I want them to be in a better situation. It's actually quite healthy. And also I think interviewing people who have made a giant mess of their lives, like Sammy the Bull or Mafia Hitman, that doesn't hurt either, right? Because you realize that not everybody's Richard Branson or Alok Kanojia.
Yeah, so that's actually brilliant, right? So I think that's where, like, we found the same thing, is that people really resonate in a positive, and these tools can be used for good or evil. Like, they can be used to help or hurt. And humanizing successful people is one of the best things you can do on social media. To recognize that even though this person is very successful, they struggle, right? Because there's this fundamental idea that these people who are successful are fundamentally different from me. And reducing that gap can be very healthy for people. So strong work.
Yeah,
man.
well, thank you. Yeah, and, you know, it wasn't super conscious at the time. It just sort of evolved that way. And I think that's what happens when you answer hundreds of fan mails and you actually listen to your audience instead of ignoring them. You find that they guide your work in a really positive way most of the time. I've heard you say something along the lines of undiagnosed ADHD is causing depression for thousands of adults. Is that accurate? I don't want to misquote you.
Yeah, so sure is the short answer. So there's a really fascinating study that looked at comorbid populations of ADHD and depression. So these are people who have both diagnoses. And then they went back and they asked which diagnosis came first. So 3% of people who were diagnosed with a mood disorder like major depressive disorder, when they were diagnosed, let's say, as a teenager with a mood disorder, 3% of them when they're 25 will grow up to have ADHD.
Wow.
70% of people who get diagnosed with ADHD will grow up to have depression. But this is out of a comorbid population. So it's not that 70% of people with ADHD are depressed, but this is a study that looks at what comes first. And for the vast majority of people, ADHD comes first. And the reason for this, like, once you work with ADHD people, or if you have ADHD, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because our current society is not designed to support people with ADHD. So what these people grow up with is all kinds of challenges that we don't really think of as consequences of ADHD. The first of which is, by the second grade, a large percentage of kids with ADHD get invited to 0 birthday parties.
Really?
So when you have,
That's
when
terrible.
you're like in, it's awful. So when you're a first grader, what happens? Like, you don't wait for your turn in line. You cut, go, oh man, the dopamine rush of going down the slide was so fun. You can't think about anything else. You're running back in, you push another kid out of the way, and then you go. You don't wait your turn. You don't play with other kids in a nice way. You're not attuned to them in a good way, right? So there's like a lot of social isolation that comes with ADHD. That's just one example. The second thing is that it's really bad. Second thing is that, so kids are really good at judging IQ. Like, it's amazing. So So we're really good at recognizing, like, stupid people and smart people.
Okay.
So this is paradoxically really damaging for an ADHD kid, because an ADHD kid knows that they're not stupid. They know, like, I know that I'm just about as smart as all of my friends, but I cannot achieve what they achieve. So there's an achievement gap. So even though I'm just as smart and I learn things just as quickly, my grades are way worse. So if you know your IQ is the same, but your performance is way worse, how does a child make sense of that? The child says, okay, I'm busted in some way.
Right.
There's something wrong with me. And they have evidence of this, right? Because other kids are able to make friends, but I just know that everyone went to a birthday party and I wasn't invited.
Oh, that sucks.
So they grow up with this idea that there's something wrong with me. And they're right? It's that people don't understand that this is a neurodiverse individual. So that core of something is wrong with me, coupled with the lack of academic performance, coupled with the lack of social performance, when all that stuff kind of piles on, they wind up depressed later in life.
That is a really great explanation. And also, man, as a parent of 2 small children and as a guy who had undiagnosed ADHD until college, that really hits. I didn't not get invited to birthday parties, but I also think my ADHD is nowhere near as severe as a lot of other people's. And when I meet other ADHD people to look at their coping strategies and stuff like that, it's just like, oh my gosh, you are on another level. I've got a friend who's a very, very successful fitness entrepreneur. she has an assistant, and one of that person's jobs is to text her things she has to do. And I'm like, don't you just use a calendar? She's like, yes, but I need someone to text me. And she showed me screenshots of her assistant texting her. It's, you have a call in 1 hour. You have a call in half an hour. You have a call in 15 minutes. That call is in 5 minutes. That call is in 2 minutes. Your call is now. Are you on that call? Are you sure you're on that call? If you don't answer me, I'm going to assume you're not on that call. And that is for every appointment in her calendar. She does that for everything because she will forget.
Yeah, so let me ask you, Jordan. When you were 33 and you had like 40% body fat or whatever, what was your mental state like?
You know, it's hard to remember. I remember I was doing pretty well in business, and I was doing pretty well in, like, I just met, you know, my wife and stuff like that. So I wasn't super depressed or anything like that, but I certainly wasn't feeling as good as I feel now at 44 when I have, you know, 15.
It's really interesting because I think, like, you know, there's a couple of other like interesting connections there. One is that people with ADHD do way better in entrepreneurship.
Really?
Yeah.
Because we can multitask like crazy because we don't have a choice? Or what's the reason?
So if you there's a lot of different reasons for that. So one is that people with ADHD are very good reactively. So if there's chaos around you, because remember, the problem is that you need a stimulus from the outside to act, right? This example that you get this text message an hour, text message 30 minutes, text message 5 minutes away. Getting 3 text messages over the course for an hour for a neurotypical person will drive them insane.
Yeah.
But for someone with ADHD, they're stimulus bound. So they're like externally motivated. So when you've got a lot of incoming, when you're playing dodgeball, and there's like 5 people throwing balls at you, if you've got ADHD, you're going to handle that really well. So oftentimes entrepreneurship is less structured. There's a lot of inbound stimulus, which actually activates your ability to focus. That pressure is what it takes for you to activate your optimal ability.
This explains so much about how my days look as well. This makes complete sense. I'm proudly sort of unemployable in any other person's business, I suppose.
Yep.
But for what I do now, being able to function and do a conversation while producing a show, while running the business, and switching from like, you need to rehearse this thing. Now you need to review this document. Now you have a phone call. Now you have a show, which is essentially a performance. And then my hobbies are like voice acting in video games and boxing. And it's like, I can do all of those things in one day, and it's not weird to shift between those activities.
Yep. Yeah, so I think that's a very dynamic mindset, and so I think the challenge with ADHD is that we don't, so sometimes, I mean, I've worked with plenty of people clinically for whom it's crippling, and they're like, it's just very impairing. Right. But I think there's a spectrum of severity, and for many of us, and I'm the same way, for many of us, like finding the right environment where we actually thrive in chaos when other people don't can actually be a competitive advantage. There's even a really fascinating study that shows that hypomania in bipolar disorder, or 4% of the population is hypomanic, which and don't even qualify for bipolar disorder. 1% of people have bipolar disorder, but 4% of people are hypomanic and are not mentally ill. So they have features of hypomania. It's really weird. Huh. But these people's income is lower than average if they have a job, and is way higher than average if they're entrepreneurs.
Interesting.
So there are all kinds of weird intersections about understanding who you are, understanding how you're wired, right? And this kind of goes back to, do you wish you were someone else? It starts with accepting who you are. And then really thinking about, okay, if this is the person that I am, what are the parts that I really do want to change? And also, how can I craft my environment to be optimal for the person that I am?
This is freaking fantastic, honestly. What are some of the easiest things that we can incorporate in our lives that give us a high return on maybe happiness, energy, etc., relative to the effort that it takes?
So I would say one of the most important things that has basically helped 99% of people I've worked with is paying attention to how you've been conditioned versus who you are. So one of the biggest sources of frustration is that we strive for things that were implanted within us. They're not really what we want. And so then when we try to go for them, our motivation is lacking, our productivity is lacking, our focus is lacking. And then what happens is we try to biohack, brain hack, life hack, whatever, hack ourselves, optimize our nutrition, start taking supplements to try to like fulfill that goal and like increase our motivation. Whereas I oftentimes find that like the best way to gain motivation is to really like understand truly who you are and what was implanted within you. And if you can separate those two things and start to craft a life based on who you really are and what you want, and that can even mean changing certain aspects of yourself. But even when we talk about changing the self, are we changing the self to make myself happy? Or are we changing the self to make society happy? My parents happy, my spouse happy. So really starting with that, I think is like the most important thing that leads to lifelong changes. And the best example that I can give you is, I had a patient come into my office who was anxious about getting fired. Because they were like, like it's so stressful, and like, I know I'm smart, sometimes I do a good job, but sometimes like people take credit for my work, and like, I'm terrified that I'm going to get fired, right? So they're like, help me fix the anxiety. And so we did this kind of work, and like 18 months later, they quit. Right? And so I would say I really got worried about this. And I even talked to some of my mentors and like supervisors, because 30% of my patients will make a career change within about 18 months of like coming into my office. And I started to wonder, am I biasing them? Am I somehow influencing them, pushing them in some way? Am I like encouraging them to do this kind of like, am I screwing them up? Basically?
Maybe they're more in touch with
adding my own values.
Maybe they're more in touch with themselves and they realize they're in the wrong career.
That's what I think really happens. And there's a lot of data to support that, right? Because when you choose a career at the age of 18, if you go to university, like you don't really know what you want. You have no idea. And then you start building up this life out of what other people tell you should be. I mean, and then like, no wonder you're not motivated like towards it, because you don't really want it.
It's like 90% of lawyers, right? That you go to undergrad and you do well, and then you're like, crap, I don't know what to do for work. And then you go to law school and you're just like, well, there's going to be a lot of money in this. And you become an investment banker or a lawyer. And then you turn 27 a few years later and your brain is fully developed. And you're like, what the actual hell am I doing in this office doing this job? This is insanity. And you move.
Yeah, and I see that with tons of like high performing people. I've seen it in medical students too. So like, when I'm mentoring people who are applying to med school or applying to residency, they'll have all this like, oh, I want to help people. Mm-hmm. You don't need to train for 8 years to help people. You can go work in a soup kitchen today.
Right. Yeah. I want to help people and make a bunch of money and have my parents finally love me because they always wanted me to be a doctor.
Absolutely. Right. So when I work with them, we ask those hard questions like, what do you really want? Right. And it's fine if you just want money and prestige. Like, let's just be honest with ourselves. We're not going to put that in the personal statement. But like if I was reading a personal statement where someone said, I want to go to medical school because I like science and I want money and I want job security, I would be totally fine with that. At least this person's being honest.
Right. Yeah. One of my friends went to medical school and she became a brain surgeon, and it was disturbing. One of the reasons she said she liked cutting people open, and she used to write her initials on people's skulls when she was doing surgery. And I'm like, you're a psychopath, but okay.
That's a little
as long
weird,
as you're a good brain surgeon and you're not like killing people on purpose, write your initials on my skull. What do I care? But there are certain people that have their reasons for going that. You're right. They do not make it into the personal statement. Man, I know we're running out of time. I'm so curious what you think of psychedelics and the use of psychedelics in treating mental illness or even just for self-actualization and personal growth. I know those are two very different use cases.
Yeah, no. So I think it's a great question. So let's understand a little bit about what psychedelics do and what they don't do. So as a psychiatrist, I've worked with basically equal numbers of people who have been transformed for the positive by psychedelics and people who have been destroyed by psychedelics.
Wow. Okay.
So let's understand that psychedelics can result in PTSD. Strangely enough, it's not always PTSD. It's like I see a lot of weird like OCD or generalized anxiety or like sustained mood problems after psychedelics, which I think there's not a whole lot of literature about. It's just clinically what, someone will come in with an anxiety disorder. I'll be like, when did this start? And they're like, it started when I tripped really bad on LSD. And now I'm anxious all the time. So that confuses some people, right? Because we also have all these studies, right? So they're still early stages, but we have a lot of data that shows that psilocybin, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy can be very helpful for trauma. We have studies that show it can be helpful. And so then people make a huge mistake. They say, here's all this research that shows that psychedelics can be healing. Therefore, if I am sick or if I'm mentally ill or I'm suicidal, let me take psychedelics and I will be healed. Huge, huge, huge mistake. So we have to understand the mechanism of psychedelics, and we have to understand the circumstances that make them transformative in a positive way. So the biggest thing is that if you want to simplify it, psychedelics induce neuroplasticity. So they induce your brain is normally in read-only mode, but we're allowed to edit it. So that's really the biggest thing that they do from a scientific perspective. That's how I'm simplifying it. So then what happens is when you enter into edit mode, what is the circumstance that you're in? So if you're alone and suicidal, the circumstance that you're in is not good.
Right.
So it can be traumatizing. Whereas if we look at the historical evidence as well as modern studies of the healing of psychedelics, what we find is that there's a shepherding in both cases. So in these spiritual traditions, you have a shaman who, when you're in that neuroplastic state, rewires you in the right direction.
Right. Yeah.
The studies on psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy find the same thing too. So over the course of like 14 weeks of psychotherapy, we'll have 3 doses of psychedelics. And when you're doing psychedelics, some of these protocols are very specific. For 8 hours, you will have a male therapist and a female therapist who will sit with you and shepherd you through that experience. But it doesn't end there because you had this neuroplasticity, you have this experience. Then what they do in the next couple of weeks is they integrate that experience into your life. What does this mean about you as a person? What does this mean about your trauma? What does this mean about your relationships? What does this mean about boundary setting? So it kind of puts your brain into edit mode, and then if you shape it the right way, then it can be quite healing.
I worry when I hear about people using these either without any supervision or, their shaman who's running their ayahuasca ceremony in the middle of nowhere 6 hours away from the nearest hospital was a stockbroker a month ago. That kind of stuff really, and I'm not even exaggerating. I've got a buddy who did, he had a really bad ayahuasca experience, and he was like, yeah, we went into the woods and we did it with 8 dudes in one room in a cabin laid out on yoga mats on the floor. And I ran out and jumped out the window into the woods and they couldn't find me because the shaman was high too. And then I finally hit a highway and turned around and came back. And I'm like, in the winter, you went outside, you ran until you found a highway through the woods and somehow you found your way back to the cabin. And of course, everybody was like, dude, where did you go? We couldn't find you. I mean, he could have died doing that. And they were, again, hours away from the nearest hospital if somebody has a seizure or whatever. It's just absolutely insane.
Yeah. So I think there is definitely potential to them. I think for a psychotherapy, I think we should really study them more robustly for mental health. Yeah. And I think that becomes really important for a couple of reasons, because I think we're starting to realize now more about how mental illness forms. And I really love the yogic traditions for this. So there's also some really interesting studies where you can ask someone what their psychedelic experience is like, and you can predict whether they will have a clinical improvement or not, based on the subjective content of their experience. So what happens when you trip is predictive for whether you get healed or not. Now, the problem is we can't control what a healthy trip is versus an unhealthy trip, but basically what we found is that if you have an ego death experience, the likelihood of a clinical improvement is super high. So if you're just out and you're flying around in space or whatever, that doesn't necessarily correlate with any kind of clinical improvement. But when we break down our sense of self, right? And this is what we're talking about. When we're talking about technology, what is technology doing? It's polluting our sense of self. It's giving us this false sense of identity. So when we use psychedelics and we have these ego death experiences, which are very hard to handle, by the way, so they can traumatize us too, but that's kind of what it breaks down our sense of our patterns about who we are, the way that we connect to other people. And one of the reasons that I love meditation is because meditation can basically induce psychedelic states. The difference is that in the meditative path, it's not clear that they induce them in the same way, so there's probably some variability there, but we know that ego death is a part of meditative experience too. And then the other thing is that in meditation, we train ourselves way more before we enter the psychedelic experience, right? So it's like dropping someone in class 5 rapids and be like, swim, bro, or training yourself up to level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 rapids before you go down class 5
in
rapids.
meditation, there's no real shortcut, but just downing a bunch of a substance, it just puts you right, it just drops you right out of the airplane.
So there are like some meditation techniques like holotropic breath work, which I'm not a huge fan of actually, because I think it's not really, it can be dangerous. But there's some techniques that I've done, 2 examples. One is one where your respiratory rate is 240 per minute. The normal respiratory rate is like 12 to 14. It's very, very difficult to do. But when you have a super high respiratory rate, it like does weird things. So definitely don't recommend that you just do that without the guidance of a guru. You should have the guidance of a guru.
I did some breath work a couple of weeks ago with people where you're just like inhaling, exhaling. And like the first, like, it was apparently 75 minutes long. For me, it seemed like it was about 15 minutes long. At the end, I was like, this is kind of some BS. What is this? And then I just started like massive emotional release. It was very interesting. I couldn't stand up. And people who listen to the show are going to be like, Jordan? Because I am not the woo-woo guy. I'm the guy who's like, whatever, this is dumb. And I was like disoriented and physically unable to stand. It was wild experience.
So I think the main thing to remember is that psychedelics don't create anything in our brain. They activate things in a very unusual way, right? So they go and bind to existing receptors and activate those, sometimes hyperactivate them in ways that are very hard to do normally. But if we also look at what happens in the brain during meditation, is very similar. So when you, the flip side of it is like one breath per hour. So there are some practices that can get you there, which sounded crazy, but now we know about free diving and stuff. And so we know that human beings can do that. But the technique that will result in brain death for one person, 1 breath an hour, will be lethal for most human beings. 20 minutes underwater will be lethal for most human beings. But if you train your physiology in the right way, you can do it safely. But so it's really interesting. But in the brain, what starts to happen is we start to build compensatory mechanisms so we don't get damaged by it. And also the changes to carbon dioxide and oxygen levels will induce alterations in how the brain activates and result in like a psychedelic experience. Once again, something that you definitely have to do under the guidance of a guru.
Right.
Otherwise, you will end up with brain damage or die.
Right. Oof. Yeah. But yeah. So thank you for that disclaimer. I think there's a lot of people who think they can just learn this from YouTube, but it's a little scary.
Yeah, I don't.
I know we're running out of time. I'm curious what you think of the backlash against talk therapy these days. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I recommend it all the time on the show, but good therapists are very hard to find. And there seems to be this impossibly rare balance of a therapist who will get you to open up and talk about your feelings and your issues, but also actually help you accomplish your goals and not just keep you on the couch for, 2 decades complaining about your mom or whatever.
Yeah, so I think the backlash against therapy is somewhat justified. So let's understand a couple of things. So the first is that I think there are a lot of things that we can do to heal mentally and support our mental health that are not talk therapy. So somewhere along the way, we started focusing on talk therapy as the only option. And I think especially when I work with men, one of the biggest assumptions that we have is that talk therapy is the way. But there's a huge bias in therapy because therapy is primarily about talking. But we also know that 70% of therapists are women. And historically in the field of psychiatry, 70% of patients are women. So when we're looking at what works, there's a huge bias towards people who benefit from verbal usage. And we know that women are actually better at verbalizing their emotions. And some of that is even due to things like estrogen. So estrogen literally increases your sensitivity to your internal emotional state. So this is why, they get judged harshly for things like PMS and stuff like that. It's just literally estrogen increases our biological awareness of what we're feeling. And people who become fathers will have some of these changes too. So I started becoming so much more emotionally sensitive after I had kids.
Totally, man.
I start crying during Disney movies now. And
I'm not the only one. I'm glad to hear you admit
it's weird.
this.
If you're a dude, it's so confusing. You're why am I tearing up? This is weird.
It's funny because society does this to us, right? It's super embarrassing. You're watching The Lion King and you're like, oh man, I hope that guy doesn't die. I'm going to lose my mind. And then it happens and you're just I have to go to the bathroom because I'm going to cry right now.
Mufasa dying is the most heartbreaking. It affects me every time. It's wild.
Yeah.
So there's literally a biological component to our ability to express our emotions. And so somewhere along the way, we started with therapy. And I think therapy is great. I love being a therapist. I think it's really good. And also, especially with a lot of the men that I work with, there are other kinds of work we'll do, more body-focused, emotion-focused, physical-focused, because emotions absolutely don't just exist in the mind and in our words, they exist in our physiology. We even have some really interesting meta-analyses that show that things like the emotional freedom technique, which I thought was pure BS, in some meta-analyses has been shown effective for trauma. So this is like where they tap on certain parts of your body and they release stored emotions. But in clinical trials, like even though we have no idea how biologically it works, in clinical trials, people improve. So I think that there's a couple of reasons. So I don't think it's all about talk therapy. I think talk therapy is great. I think there are a lot of other methodologies that work for people that are not talk therapy. So there are even studies that show that, exercise, there's a recent big study that came out that showed that exercise is just as effective as talk therapy for improving some aspects of mental health. So I think a big part of it is that talk therapy doesn't work for everyone. And then an even bigger part is that we have a very, very poor system for improvement as therapists. So if you kind of look at it, like, how do you know, like, that the food you're making is good? How do you improve? You can taste it. You can see how many customers are coming in to eat your pizza, right? Like, you have all kinds of measures. And especially if you look at something like Amazon, we have product reviews. You get emails. We have metrics that show us that we're performing. Psychotherapy has very, very few metrics to show a therapist that they're doing bad. And the crazy thing is, as our field, like, we actually discourage this stuff. So, I mean, the number of times I've been in supervision and, like, my business mind is confused by some of the stuff that I hear from my fellow therapists. If a patient doesn't show up, if a patient comes in for one appointment and never shows up again, and then you're a therapist and you go ask your therapist, hey, I had this patient who didn't show up again. We're going to construct all these like psychoanalytic, oh, they weren't ready for therapy. Like, you didn't do anything wrong. It's like some kind of weird, like emotionally supportive kind of group. No one is ever saying, and it's even like sometimes an ethical violation to track that patient down and say, hey, what did I do wrong? So we have no basic system of like customer feedback in the field of therapy. And so what that results in is a lot of therapists who like don't realize when they're making a mistake. And so I think what we have is a field of people who, like, some of them are not very good and some of them are very good. And we don't have a good system for the people to be able to tell the difference.
Right. You basically have to look and, well, this person's $300 an hour and this person's $50 an hour. Okay, which one can I afford? They're probably different, but that's nothing. That's marketing. That's the area where they live. I mean, I have no... I've gone through a bunch of therapists. Some were great in past years and some are great now. But I will tell you, there's often, I'm hitting that like switch therapist button a few times when I select therapists.
Yes, and I think there's another like really challenging part, which is that sometimes I think that people who judge therapists as bad are doing a bad job as patients. And this is something we never talk about. We never say that the patient is doing something wrong. Whereas, like, absolutely the patient can do wrong things. So I'll give you just one quick case. Like, so someone was saying, I didn't make any progress in therapy for 2 years, and then I switched therapists. And this therapist gives me no agency. They don't talk about what I want to talk about. They're very, very insistent that I just do this thing. But, like, I don't feel like they're giving, they don't care about what I want. And then you'll post this on the internet, right, which is where the backlash is, and you'll get a bunch of other people who will say, like, yeah, screw that therapist, find a different therapist. Whereas as a therapist, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, hold on a second. You had 2 years of unproductive therapy and you probably did what you wanted instead of what you needed to do. And now the second therapist is like, hey, what you wanted to do didn't help you. Let's do something else. And so there's a lot of nuance there where, like, a lot of times therapists, it's really challenging, but sometimes as a therapist, the way to help someone is to like face the difficult stuff. And some people do not like that.
No, it's a good therapist guides you there and holds your feet to the fire, but in a way that keeps you coming back, I suppose. Right.
Well, hold on a second, because now whose responsibility is it for you to keep coming back? See, now what you're doing is really subtle. You're making this very interesting tightrope that you want the therapist to walk, where they need to like push you, but push you the right amount, because otherwise you're going to leave.
It's like a trainer, right? If you barf, you might not come back, but maybe you're just really out of shape, and when you work out in any reasonable way, you barf, and you just got to push through that. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think it's super challenging, but like, I know it sounds wild, but A big part of this is like, I mean, I've had plenty of patients who don't take responsibility and don't do their part. And we don't say that often enough.
Right. This makes sense. Yeah. I basically, if you're not, I look forward / dread therapy and training sessions, right? And I guess that's the balance you need to have. But I'm also used to pushing through discomfort and finding results on the other end. And if you've never done that before, therapy and working out and anything you do in life is going to be hard, man, I think. So what can someone do to get the most out of therapy? I don't think we're probably asking that enough.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things, and I think people don't do this enough, so one of the biggest things is talk about how the experience of therapy is going for you. So if you feel like you're not making progress, tell someone. Tell your therapist, hey, I've been coming here for 6 weeks. I feel like I'm not making progress. Or I've been coming here for 6 months. I feel like I'm not making progress. So there's a really subtle thing where patients want to make their therapists proud. And oftentimes making them proud means pretending we're getting better. And I think that doesn't help anyone. So, and this is where, and I know like, so sort of saying like, hey, I'm not making progress, or this is what's working for me, this is what isn't working for me. And then I think this is where there's like almost a really important test for a therapist, which is how much responsibility does the therapist take for that? And sometimes if they say, well, if you're not making any progress, that's your problem, right? So this is where I think we get to your point about hold my feet to the fire, but also encourage me and teach me in the right way.
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of shared responsibility, and it's kind of like if something isn't working, you got to talk about it. That's the most important thing to do.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess people, you're absolutely right. That's something I'm going to have to remember as well. Hey, thank you so much for coming back on the show, man. Before I go, I selfishly wanted to ask, as a parent of 2 young kids, what do you think, what does the research say / what do you think about screen time? Because my kids, they watch iPad, but they learn so much stuff from it. They're learning different words. They're learning about how things work. I'm always blown away by what they seem to learn from that. But whenever I look at screen time research, I don't find a whole lot of like clinical research. I just find parents shaming other parents on Instagram or whatever.
Yeah, so the first thing to understand is that screen time is not homogenous. Right? So like playing a video game, the kind of video game you play, whether you watch YouTube, whether you watch short form or long form, all that is like very different. So, I mean, this is why like I literally wrote a book about it, right? So How to Raise a Healthy Gamer is all about guiding parents and helping them understand this problem. And I think the biggest thing is that screen time is not monolithic. And the second thing is that to remember that all of the addictions around screens, we get addicted because they are doing something for our brain. So the problem with screen time addiction is when you become dependent on the screen to fulfill that need.
I see.
So when pornography becomes the main way that I satisfy myself sexually, that's a problem. When social media becomes, when I stop living my life in the real world and I start existing on social media exclusively, that becomes a problem. So I'd say the biggest thing about, a healthy approach to screen time for kids, if I had to summarize it super, super fast, it is let them build a fulfilling life for them as kids. So they should be doing some kind of sports. They should be socializing. They should be expressing themselves creatively, studying. And then the screen can be added on top of that. But it should never be a substitute for parenting, right? And there are other challenges here where, like, oftentimes we use it. I sometimes use a screen as a substitute for parenting because I don't have the bandwidth. It's really hard to be a parent right now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think the main thing is it's not so much, and a lot of times parents will ask how much is too much. Well, it depends on what else is going on. So I've worked with some kids who will, use screens for 20 hours a week, and it's totally fine because they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing. So I think it's more about building, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, like it's about building positive stuff, and then screens can be after that. But generally speaking, I don't advocate for any regular use. So my kids, will be screen-free, generally speaking, 4 days out of the week. And I actually rather like a binge approach to screen usage where we'll like plan something, right? So like this Saturday, what are we going to do as a family? Like we're going to go play putt-putt. And then next weekend, it's like we're going to have a Smash Brothers party or a Mario Kart family party. So we're going to we're going to play for like 3 hours until bedtime, and we can stay up extra late. So I think that there's a way to like sort of model usage, and it's kind of like the porn addiction where we don't want second screen usage. The most damaging screen usage is the screen usage that permeates our day. But keeping it localized to a particular area and time for a particular goal, I think is totally fine.
This makes so much sense. I always sort of worry that kids who get a ton of screen time are also being like a ton are being raised maybe by disengaged parents. Maybe that disengagement is actually the thing causing the adverse outcomes that people say is caused by the screen. So it's not the iPad, it's the fact that dad works until 9 p.m. every night and doesn't always come home, and mom works during the day and she gets home late, and then she's got to deal with running the whole household and gets no help, or there's a substance issue. Like maybe it's not Coco Melon that's causing the damage here.
Yeah. So it's a great point. So I think like 40% of kids, I think, grow up in single parent households, right? So it's like the numbers are not in your favor. And it's a really good point that, you know, is it the screens themselves, or is it also, and the answer is it's both. It's the screen, because the screen does have a particularly damaging effect, but it's also the circumstances and risk factors of the household that contribute to that mental health decline.
Thanks once again for doing the show, man. You got a ton of wisdom to share. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, likewise, Jordan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube only has about a quarter of the episodes that we release here on the Jordan Harbinger Show audio feed. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you'll find access to all of our shows that don't appear on YouTube, such as Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, and even lawns to find out if they're backed by science and or logic. Also, our Feedback Friday episodes, where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, and some of that stuff is dicey. Every episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful that you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.